Hey there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Succinct Psychology, aka Succinct. My name is Jaia Hendrickson, and today I'm going to be continuing where I left off in my previous video, covering Chapter 6 in Principles of Social Psychology, looking at perceiving others. Now, you may recall from my last video, negative information is more heavily weighted than is positive information. In addition to the heavy weight that we give to negative traits, we also give a particular emphasis to the traits warm and cold. Imagine two men, Brad and Phil, who are described using these two sets of characteristics. Brad is industrious, critical, warm, and determined. Phil is industrious, critical, cold, practical, and determined. As you can see, the descriptions are identical except for the presence of the word warm and cold. Solomon Asch, in a 1946 study, found that people described using these two sets of characteristics were perceived very differently. The warm person very positively, and the cold person very negatively. The particular dimension, warm versus cold, makes a big difference in how we perceive people, much more so than do other traits. And so as a result, the traits warm and cold are known as central traits. Overall, the message is clear. If we want to get someone to like us, we should try to act in a warm manner towards them. Be friendly, nice, and interested in what they say. This attention that you pay to them will be more powerful than any other characteristics that you might try to display. Now, it's frequently been said that first impressions matter, and social psychological research supports this idea. Information that we learn first is weighted more heavily than information that comes later. This is known as the primacy effect. One demonstration of the primacy effect was conducted by the same researcher, Solomon Asch. In his research, participants learned some traits about a person, and then they made judgments about them. One half of the participants saw lists of traits: intelligent, industrious, impulsive, critical, stubborn, and envious. The other half of the participants were given a different list. That was envious, stubborn, critical, impulsive, industrious, and intelligent. Now, you may have noticed something interesting about these two lists. They contained exactly the same traits except in reverse order. Asch discovered something interesting in his study. Because the traits were the same, we might expect that both groups would form the same impression of that person, but that was actually not the case. Rather, Asch found that the participants who heard the first list, in which the positive traits came first, formed much more favorable impressions than did the second participants who received the second list, in which the negative traits came first. And this is not to say that it's always good to be first. In some cases, the information that comes last can be most influential. Recency effects, in which information that comes later is given more weight, although much less common than primacy effects, may sometimes occur. For example, Bruin de Bruin in a 2005 study found that in competitions such as the Eurovision Song Contest and in ice skating, higher marks were given to the competitors who performed last. Because behavior is determined by both the person and the situation, we must attempt to determine which of these two causes actually determine the behavior. The process of trying to determine the causes of other people's behavior is known as causal attribution. Making a causal attribution is a bit like conducting a social psychology experiment. We carefully observe the people we're interested in, and we note how they behave in different social situations. After we've made our observations, we then draw our conclusions. We make a personal or internal or dispositional attribution when we decide that the behavior was caused primarily by the person. A personal attribution might be something like, I think they broke up because Jane was not committed to the relationship. At other times, we may determine that the behavior was caused primarily by the situation. In this case, we call this making a situational or external attribution. A situational attribution might be something like, I think they broke up because they were under such financial stress. And yet, at other times, we may decide that the behavior was caused by both the person and the situation. Now, when people have multiple sources of information about the behavior of a person, they can make attributions by assessing the relationship between a person's behavior and the social context in which it occurs. One way of doing so is to use the covariation principle, which states that a given behavior is more likely to have been caused by the situation if that behavior co-varies or changes across situations. Researchers found that people focus on 3 kinds of covariation information when they're observing the behavior of others. Consistency information is when a situation seems to be the cause of a behavior if the situation always produces the behavior. For instance, if I always start to cry at weddings, then it seems as if the wedding is the cause of my crying. Distinctiveness information is when a situation seems to be the cause of a behavior if the behavior occurs when the situation is present but not when it is not present. So for example, if I only cry at weddings but not at any other time, then it seems as if the wedding is the cause of my crying. Consensus information is when a situation seems to be the cause of a behavior if the situation creates the same behavior in most people. So for instance, if many people cry at weddings, then it seems as if the wedding is the cause of my and other people's crying. So we see here we have consensus, which is how unique is your behavior compared to other people in the same situation. Distinctiveness, which is how unique is your behavior compared to the way you act in other situations. And then we have consistency, which is how unique is your behavior compared to how you always act whenever you're in that same situation. Another time that we may use our powers of causal attribution to help us determine the causes of events is when we attempt to determine why we or others have succeeded or failed at a task. Think back for a moment to a test that you took, or perhaps about another task that you've performed, and consider why you did either well or poorly on it. Bernard Weiner in 1985 was interested in helping determine the causes of success or failure because he felt that this information was particularly important to us. Accurately determining why we have succeeded or failed will help us see which tasks we're good at and which tasks we may need to work on in order to improve. He also proposed that we make these determinations by engaging in causal attributions, and that the outcomes of our decision-making process were made either to the person, so I succeeded or failed because of my own personal characteristics, or to the situation, I succeeded or failed because of something about the situation. According to Weiner, success or failure can be seen as either coming from personal causes, so ability or motivation, or from situational causes, so luck or task difficulty. He also argued that those personal and situational causes could be either stable, so less likely to change over time, or unstable, more likely to change over time. So if you did well on a test because you're really smart, then this is a personal and stable attribution of ability. It's clearly something that's caused by you personally, and it's also a stable cause. If you're smart today, you'll probably be smart in the future. However, if you succeeded more because you studied hard, well then this success is due to motivation. It is again personal because you did study, but it's also unstable. Although you may have worked really hard to study for this test, you may not work as hard on the next one. Weiner considered task difficulty to be a situational cause. You may have succeeded on the test because it was easy, and so he assumed that the next test would probably be easy for you as well. Or in other words, that the task, whatever it is always either easy or hard. Finally, Weiner considered success due to luck, so you just guessed a lot of the answers correctly, to be a situational cause, but one that was more unstable than task difficulty. Now, one way that our attributions are biased is that we're often too quick to attribute the behavior of other people to something personal about them rather than to something about their situation. This is a classic example of the general human tendency of underestimating how important the social situation is in determining behavior. When we explain the behavior of others, we tend to overestimate the role of the person factor and overlook the impact of the situations. In fact, the tendency to do so is so common that it's known as the fundamental attribution error, or the correspondence bias. The fundamental attribution error involves a bias in how easily and frequently we make personal versus situational attributions to others. Another similar way that we may overemphasize the power of the person is that we tend to make more personal attributions for the behavior of others than we do for ourselves, and to make more situational attributions for our own behavior than we do for the behavior of others. This is known as the actor-observer difference. When we're asked about the behavior of other people, we tend to quickly make trait attributions. So for example, oh Sarah, she's really shy. On the other hand, when we think of ourselves, we're more likely to take the situation into account. We tend to say, well, I'm shy in my psychology discussion class, but when I'm with my baseball friends, I'm not shy at all. So when our friend behaves in a helpful way, we naturally believe that she's a friendly person. When we behave in the same way, on the other hand, we realize that there may be a lot of other reasons why we did what we did. And here's two funny little comic strips that kind of show fundamental attribution error and actor-observer difference. The top one says, so if it's good, it's Mr. Coffee, and if it's bad, it's me. And then the next one, which is the peanut gallery, which I'm sure you've seen before. Why are you always so anxious to criticize me? I just think I have a knack for seeing other people's faults. What about your own faults? I have a knack for overlooking them. It's a pretty funny little example of those two errors and biases that we often do. Now you might be able to get a feel of the actor-observer difference by taking the following short quiz. First, I want you to think about a person you know. So your mom, or your roommate, or maybe someone from one of your classes. I'll give you a second to get that person in your mind. Alright, now that you've got that person in your mind, for each row, think about which of these three choices best describes his or her personality. For instance, is a person's personality more energetic, relaxed, or does it depend on the situation? I'll give you a second to think about that first row of that person you're thinking of. Alright, now I want you to think about those same questions again, but for yourself. Richard Nisbet and his colleagues had college students complete this exact task. They did it for themselves, for their best friend, for their father, and then for the newscaster Walter Cronkite. And as you can see in the table, the participants checked one of the two trait terms more often for other people than they did for themselves, and they checked off depends on the situation more frequently for themselves than they did for the other person. So we see on trait term, for self we have 11, for best friend we have 14, for father we have 13, for Walter Cronkite we have 15. And then on depends on the situation, we have self at 8, best friend at 5, father at 6, and Walter Cronkite at 4. So this just demonstrates the actor-observer difference. Alright folks, this is going to conclude my video covering part 2 of chapter 6 in Principles of Social Psychology. I hope you learned a thing or two, and I'll see you guys next time.